Welcome to Page One Power's partner webinar. We are very excited to be talking to you today. Today we're going to be talking about managing SEO effectively and meeting your team's needs. We are joined with David Dalka, founder of Fearless Revival. Join us in the chat here at Page One Power on Twitter, and join us in the hashtag at P1P Webinar. I am your host, Colin Eggleston, Marketing Events Coordinator here at Page One Power, and joined by David Dalka. Very excited to have David with us today. David is founder and managing director at Fearless Revival. He is a global CEO, CFO, CXO, and board advisor, business keynote speaker, corporate governance expert, quoted in major press, and guest posts. In fact, David actually had just contributed an incredible guest post to our very own blog here last week. So please check that out on Linkarati. David, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's wonderful to be with you, Colin.
Excellent. Today we want to have kind of a bit of an interactive, kind of a conversation with the audience. We want to hear about your frustrations, and if you have any frustrations with the SEO world and management, please submit them and submit your questions here via the webinar panel as well, and we will address those. And we'd love to contact you later on as well if there's any conversations to be had there. So yeah, we want to ask you, what are you most frustrated by when it comes to SEO management in your life? So we're going to start off before our conversation. I just want to get a quick poll for the audience here. Poll question number one: what best describes your current role? I'm going to go ahead and send out the poll right now. And all right, poll question number one. All right, let's go ahead and launch that. All right, so please answer the poll question here. So there's a lot of us different. We may be part of an agency, maybe kind of an executive managerial role. We just kind of want to see what the audience is looking like, because we have a lot of information here today that's going to kind of apply to everyone involved. So we're going to be talking about best practices for managing an SEO team. Or if you're participating in an SEO team, you're part of an agency, you're part of an organization that has an SEO department. We're going to be talking about best practices to kind of thrive and survive in that environment as well. So we have a little bit of everything here for everybody. So looks like the poll looks like we got okay, excellent. Looks like we got a good response from that. It's going to go ahead and close out of that poll now. And excellent. So looks like we got some good results there, so I do appreciate that from everybody. So David, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass things along to you, my friend, and we'll have the conversation. We'll start us off here. Start us off our conversation. Passing it.
Thank you, Colin.
Yeah.
So first, let's ground myself of how I got involved in the SEO community and where that came from. I'd read Search Engine Watch back in the days. Danny Sullivan did that in 2004, 2005. I was leaving a large company and came back to Chicago at the end of 2005, and I reached out to Danny and I asked him about becoming involved in the conference in some way, and he put me on volunteer microphone Q&A duty, and that was fascinating because I got to meet all the most interesting people in the room, the people that ask questions just like the ones you're going to ask later in this webinar to us. Those people, the ones with the challenges, those people, the ones with the issues, those are the people that didn't get picked for the panel, those are the people with the startup idea that want to talk to a competitor, all really interesting things. And then when I was at that conference, because I had all those conversations, I saw this trend, which was people had these new SEO skills, and they came up to me and said, my management doesn't know how to manage me. I'm frustrated with the issues that come with this. And, I really just heard this over and over and over and over again. I walked out of that conference thinking that's going to be an easy problem to solve. Actually, here now, more than a decade later, we've still barely scratched the surface in solving that problem because it's an organizational one. It involves success metrics, it involves the way people give you resources and ask you to allocate your time. And we're going to talk about some of those things in more detail as we go through here today. So, the challenge of managing the SEO team is that the SEO work is not understood or respected by organizations. This is for many reasons, but the primary one is senior management has never done SEO themselves. In traditional work life in the past, people have done things in organizations, and then they rose up through the ranks and did different parts of the role, but they always understood that first role that they did. Now, senior management, whether they're a marketer, the chief marketing officer, or whether they're a CEO or a CFO, they don't actually understand all of the issues of SEO and how it's different than paid search or social media or other things like that, and it creates challenges for them in terms of figuring out where they should go, how that should work, and what they should do on a daily basis. So, what we have to do as a community, the search community, is raise awareness. They need help defining the right changes to make, and they need to get out of the way and not hinder your process. So, the best way to start that process is to just reach out to the people that you see creating those things and ask for a private side conversation. Don't do it in the big meeting where everybody's there, but just say, hey, can I have lunch with you or a cup of coffee or something like that, and take them there and walk them through that process. And then once we're done with this webinar, I think you'll want to share the blog post with them in advance and then kind of discuss the things that go with that, and you can have a lively conversation with them and slowly, one by one, take those people and win them over to your side so they understand it's about the business and the business issues and the business being successful, and it's not just about some technical gibberish or cat memes or other types of things that you see in parts of the SEO community. So the focus needs to go beyond technical SEO to focus on customer and business outcomes. There's so many technology tools out there in the SEO world that I meet SEOs all the time that spend most of the day just clicking buttons and running reports, and it's kind of detached from the reality of connecting from the customer and creating the business outcomes that they seek to do. And I think as a community, we should strive to spend more time focusing on customer and business outcomes and less time on these technology issues, because they've kind of been overdone. They kind of are automated and don't allow your personal professional judgment to be put into the situation, and they don't allow the other things that you can do to be there and become the business leader that you are. So the goal of SEO ultimately is connecting with the right customers so that they take action. That has nothing to do with a technology report. That has nothing to do with a ranking report. That has to do with what actually happens on that website and what results does it lead to online and offline in that world. So once you go there, you then understand that SEO done wrong is something that can have huge consequences. You miss the keywords. You don't rank for things because you don't have enough links on the site for the things that are there. You don't have the right page structure. You don't have the right robots, TXT. All that little stuff adds up and can have huge consequences for a business. So we're going to run through an example here of a business that was adversely affected by search done wrong. I first did this back in 2010 when I was speaking at a conference in Milwaukee in front of a couple hundred business executives. And the conference organizer said, find me something happening in Milwaukee that involves this stuff. And I went and looked at the newspaper, and sure enough, I found this business that was being adversely affected by search while their other competitor was thriving. So the company was called Porters of Racine. It was founded in 1857 by William Porter. The company sold super high-end luxury furniture. You want the best stuff in the Midwest, people came there, people did the other things there. The company, as you can see by the map on the right, had a unique location in Racine, Wisconsin, which isn't a big city like Milwaukee and isn't a big city like Chicago and the ritzy northern suburbs of Chicago like Kenilworth and Winnetka and Glencoe and places like that. So the customers always had to come from a distance to come there. When they founded the business, they understood this, and they were consistently a pioneer in bringing, advertising, initially newspapers, eventually radio and TV to the Chicago and Milwaukee markets. If you look at the Chicago and Milwaukee TV markets being centered where they're at, they obviously overlay this map pretty perfectly. and we go in there and we did those things. The company, survived a major fire, rebuilt. It was a thriving business. And in the Simon Gottlieb era, another owner of the business in the 1930s, he traveled around the U.S. studying marketing best practices of other furniture stores. So he would literally travel from city to city and meet people, much the way people in the SEO community talk to each other and share best practices and learn about different things that are there. When he was on the East Coast, he saw museum displays that had antique furniture, and he said, hey, I could do the same thing with new furniture displays and kind of give that museum experience. And he brought that to Porters of Racine. As you can see by the photo here, people would come from Milwaukee and Chicago and take full day trips to come stand in line just to see these furniture openings. And just look at that line. It's amazing that people would travel that far and would come there to do those different types of things. And then I wrote a blog post about this in 2010, talking about the issue. But here's what happened. Later in life here, this little thing called Google came along, and it changed the demand curve and discovery curve for high-end furniture. You don't buy high-end furniture every week. You don't have a preferred vendor. You don't have a preferred store. So you start with an unbranded search query, as all infrequent purchases do. You start with an unbranded search query. That's one of the major things senior management needs to know is, the difference between unbranded search queries and branded search queries. And it's amazing to me how many people I meet who don't understand that basic concept of discovery and where that goes. So if people, people will search local if they expect to buy local. So you need those qualifiers in there. And the demand capture, versus awareness, there was a mature market that was clearly a demand capture market, and they didn't have the unbranded search queries in there. And below is a Google keyword tool shot from a previous era. So this was like 2010, the transparency which Google would show you, even to the SEO community. You didn't even need to have an AdWords login. You could log in and get this level of detail about, the keywords. Milwaukee furniture was the example I have here, but there's, Wisconsin furniture, Chicago furniture. You could think of all the other ones you would want to think of. And this was a very transparent tool that allowed you to look at those things there.
I really miss the time when this tool was a lot more useful. It's bringing back good memories there.
Yeah, no, it gets into that conversation about, one of the things managers need to manage, Colin, is as we've talked about, is, the transparency of Google is becoming less and less, whether it's this or whether it's, 4 ads on top of the page. There's different things that are happening. But anyways, to finish this Porters of Racine story, the store closed in 2010 after 153 years, simply because in the internet era, it never built a website that had unbranded keywords so it could be discovered. And they slowly spent money on traditional advertising that was no longer relevant, while the demand curve for furniture buying shifted to unbranded search queries almost exclusively, and they became invisible and slowly went out of business. That's an amazing thing, but this can happen in different degrees to any business. They're not always going to go out of business, but they could underperform or not meet their numbers or different things and leads there. But we need to think about these things and look at that so that people understand that. So, 153 years is a long time. People need to understand those things that can go wrong. People need to look at that and see what's taking place so that they know what's occurring. So what people need to understand is that search done wrong is a silent business killer. And what I mean by a silent business killer is, your reports won't tell you you're doing search wrong. They really won't. That's a personal judgment issue. It's a business judgment issue. It's an understanding your customer issue. There's nothing out there that says these are all the people that went to your competitors yesterday that you didn't see. And while that's a really basic business concept, it's not discussed often in the search world, but it should be, because it's about the professional judgment of that SEO, looking at the true customer issues beyond the things that are there, and figuring that out, that is what it's about. So you need to now rise above the noise. Back, portals we were seeing in the early days would have done fine if it just had the right keywords on the website. But now, due to, cell phones and the ever-increasing amount of content marketing and all these different things, people are now having, infinite content on the web, and it makes it harder for you to be visible. So not only do you have to have keywords, you have to have the right keywords in the right places at the right time and the right place in the funnel, and then you have to have high-quality links to overcome the infinite noise that's out there on the internet.
Yeah, and links is kind of something that we do a lot of thinking about here over at Page One Power, and links really, with the visibility aspect, they play kind of a few important roles. One, having high quality links pointing to your site, especially high quality relevant links, they're going to help build your site's authority. And so an authority really kind of goes two ways: brand authority, right? So you have that kind of, you have that awareness, you have that top of mind, you're appealing to people in the marketing funnel and they know about your brand, but also authority in the eyes of Google and how well is your website going to perform, year over year in the keywords, in the keywords that you're trying to target, and compared to your competitors. So the links are really kind of a huge aspect of that. But also, I think one thing that I'm just thinking about that Porter story, and it's such a perfect encapsulation of kind of the transition of the global marketplace and how a successful business with a great business model, a great product, huge brand awareness outside of the internet, outside of Google, can lose to people that have other businesses that have better visibility. And I think links too. One thing, kind of the last point I want to make here about links and that I love is that links, besides rankings, forget rankings too, is that they're an avenue for discovery and for people to discover your brand. They see a link on an article. They see a link that somebody mentioned us in a blog post. They see a link on a great resource page. And that's not showing up at, that's not where necessarily going to be a keyword search that got someone, looking for your business and they click and they convert. They found you through kind of an organic, natural exploration, and then they click and then they find your site and they convert and you get that traffic outside of the search. So that's one of the things I just love about kind of the links. And I think that if we can go back in time and kind of talk to them about the importance of those links, and search viability, we might it might have a much different outcome.
Yeah, and I think that not only that, but I'd say that I get some of the best leads I get not only from search but from situations where people have come to my website from a link on another site they were already on, and I think that's a really good point we forget is looking at that and understanding that people that trust isn't just machine, it's human, right? It's going in there and finding those things. So it's about creating issues, creating awareness of the real issues. And when I say the real issues, it's about business. It's about customers. It's about finding customers, converting customers, satisfying customers, and then creating situations that they want to create word of mouth for you or link to you or do any of those kinds of things as a part of that process as we go. And success means integrating your SEO into its customer and business strategy. Unfortunately, many obstacles prevent organizations from reaching this summit because of ignorance, lack of exposure, and quite frankly, the lack of the SEO community's ability to translate this stuff from technical gibberish that are on several blogs out there into something that a senior business executive can understand. That's not just a problem within the SEO community, it's a problem within the business press, the traditional business press community too, because that press has shrunk over the past 25 years from giant newspapers with large investigative reporting departments to outlets that now mostly aggregate what happened on blogs yesterday. As you know, as readers of blogs yourselves, some blogs have really high content quality and others don't. And we're losing the ability to see that filter and look through those things. So, the summary there is management. What's the one thing I want you to take away from this webinar? Management needs to understand that search done wrong is a silent business killer, but this is preventable. It's how do you manage it. It's not the process itself that's a failure. It's how it's managed that's a failure. When I first got into search, I was friends with a woman who worked at this company that did search marketing, and she'd text me on Skype every day, literally almost in tears half the time because she wasn't understood. They were asking her to do things in time frames that weren't realistic. They were asking her to do things that had to do with endless reporting instead of, doing the work that she wanted to do. There was, myriads of other things that go with that, and it's there. So that's kind of what I'm going to coin the term here today as I'm going to call SEO antagonists, the people that either intentionally or unintentionally create challenges in the SEO community on a daily basis that make your job harder, or if you're a manager trying to manage this, create forces within your organization that adversely affect your attempts at creating good SEO. The first one is the traditional ad agency model itself. Most people don't think about this, but in big companies that do ad agencies models, it's still a percentage of how much you spend on ads that they get paid. Sometimes 10%, sometimes another number. But that creates a perverse incentive for them to encourage you to spend as much as possible rather than spend effectively on the right channels. That has nothing to do with maximizing what your CEO and CFO and board care about, which is, am I maximizing the revenue of our enterprise? Am I maximizing the cash flow of our enterprise? Am I maximizing the market share and customers of our enterprise? They care about those things. I first learned about this with a story of when I thought I wanted to work at a large ad agency. I talked to an alum of my business school, and he agreed to take me to lunch and talk about it. And over a 2-hour lunch, in the first 2 minutes, he shared with me that why he would never hire me to work at his company. And through that conversation, he basically said that the revenue from search was small and disruptive to this legacy model where they earn far more money and far more cash flow. And it was very insightful and showed me that sometimes professional services firms don't always act in your best interest, whether it's a large advertising agency or some other types of models that we'll talk about. Another part of SEO antagonists is when I walk into companies and advise them on interim digital strategy or different things like that, almost always they're going to be overpaying for PPC and spending much less on SEO. I've seen situations where that spend is 20, 30 to 1, literally, which is crazy when you consider the cash flow implications for the business of that PPC. Yes, it has measurability and ROI, but that measurability does not equal effectiveness. And people get trapped in this efficiency versus effectiveness mode with PPC sometimes and don't look at that larger picture. Further, this goes into Google's changing with some of the unchecked monopoly power that Google has. Google, is doing things that change the search engine results page on a regular basis. Most recently, in February of 2016, they changed some competitive search queries from 3 ads to 4 ads on the top of the page, which moved down the first SEO result a notch. But in a world where we created transparency on this and focus on this, perhaps Google can't get away with that. So I think we as a community need to have conversations about these types of issues much more frequently and much more diligently, not only with ourselves, but with other people throughout our company, other stakeholders, and look through those things that way. my favorite all-time SEO antagonist, new websites. The firm that builds new websites over and over and over again, or does rebranding, that creates either sites that have broken links that were never 301, or worse, moved to a new domain altogether and never 301, and does this stuff over and over and over again. It might look nice on your iPad, but if nobody can find it, what good does it do?
Yeah, I've definitely kind of experienced this too, because it's so, because the way that kind of the traditional business model, especially kind of larger organizations where you'll have a lot of these siloed teams where you have your SEO team in their dungeon somewhere, who knows where, and then you'll have like a website dev team. So you have your web dev team and maybe your digital strategy, maybe your digital marketing team. They're kind of in there, and they're completely siloed from any sort of SEO strategy. And so the web dev team will say, hey, we're rolling out a new website. It's going to look great. The customer's going to love it. We've done a think tank. Customers are wild about the new website. It works on all the mobile platforms. But oh yeah, by the way, all the we're archiving the blog. We're archiving the blog. We're archiving all these other content, and we're changing it to Flash instead of HTML. So now nothing can be crawled, and nothing, basically nothing can be indexed. We just lost everything, but it looks great, and the think tanks love it. So, so that's another one of the pitfalls of kind of having that kind of siloed, not getting the SEO advice, and that does have a real business outcome. If you lose all that equity sometimes literally overnight, alarm bells. You start having war room meetings. Alarm bells start going off, and it's a big mistake to fix.
Yeah, and I think that it reminds me of why silos are bad, and why the specialty of fearless survival is helping companies manage not just SEO, which I'm a part of this community, but any undermanaged niche siloed thing, whether it's SEO or event marketing like what you do, Colin, or whether it's procurement departments, or a niche within IT, like the Q&A process to make sure that your code doesn't crash when you load it on that new website. It's out there, and it's amazing that people just they're out there chasing their tail without really thinking about the larger business strategy. And it's just an amazing thing. Not to mention, just the last thing on new websites is, it's annoying to people. Let's be honest. I mean, it's my dad has some vision issues as he's 81 years old now, and if you redesign a website, it might take him a month to figure out how to peruse it again. And so for older audiences, especially if your site skews to an older audience, you should try to avoid this new website pariah and spend that money on SEO, or spend that money on some other focus of improving your business strategy or culture or something like that, and go through that. So that's just it's an area of pet peeve for me and Colin, as you can see, and we'll move on. But another area is this whole senior executive obsession with ROI. This is entrenched by the business school thinking that focuses this on ROI, and it goes back to what we said about PPC, which is, just because there's ROI doesn't mean it's the most effective thing for the business overall. If you're spending less cash flow once you're ranking for a term that brings you the right customers, that's much better than doing this here. To bring that out fully, I once had a client that came to me with a search marketing and channel impairment. They were banned from buying AdWords because they were in one of those fringe element type spaces. And he came to me and they said, well, people are going to keep searching, so let's do this. And so we managed we took a company that did nothing but PPC its entire existence, and moved it to a diversified marketing strategy, SEO, flyers in the mailbox, with your order, all that stuff. And a funny thing happened, Colin. After 6 months, not only did we replace all the customers with these new diversified channels, they had lower risk profiles, but they, the CFO came to him and said, our gross margin is now 600 basis points higher than what it was when we started this process. So the crisis led to a rethinking that allowed those things to happen, and then that allowed, because they focused on the fundamentals properly with the advice I gave them, and they implemented everything I said, they actually got that massive improvement in the P&L. 600 basis points is an enormous change, and while it's not going to happen in every situation, a smaller change is possible in every business. And it's getting people's head around that. But just to reverse that, if somebody came to me and called me and said, "Can you increase my margin 600 basis points?" we'd probably never get there, because they'd never allow me to let them focus on the basics. Who's my customer? How do I reach them? How do I reach them at the lowest marginal cost consistently, and going through those things? So, related to this is the senior executives preach focusing on the data constantly now, but they miss the fact that web analytics is a partial data set. This concept is so simple yet so huge. Again, I said earlier, search done wrong is a silent business killer. And, as I said, it's there. But here's the thing. Your web analytics don't tell you everything you need to know. They don't tell you all the people that were shopping for a product or service like yours yesterday that never landed on your website. That's the number one thing that a CEO or a board should be concerned about is, what's the enterprise risk? What's the reach that we don't have here? Because you can have ROI all day long, but if you're only reaching 1% of your potential overall customer set, are you really that successful? Probably not. So it's looking at those things through a different light and seeing the things that are there in a different dogma. And again, it's amazing, and it goes through the history of what web analytics tools are. They are a tool that were programmed by technologists who listen to brand marketers to measure the previous paradigm instead of measure the current paradigm we live in. And so I keep waiting for a next generation of web analytics tools to arrive that kind of really go into the bigger issues of this, and in that I would also include some of the issues of, competitive analysis, which, Colin's had some other guests on that talk about that in more detail. But it's an interesting thing to think about, because most people just look at the web analytics every day and forget it. And the same thing with that, they do conversion. Every company's got these big conversion departments now, and I meet senior executives from those companies all the time. And one of them was bragging to me recently about the fact that they just hired a group of 30 people to do conversion. And I said, that's great. How many people do you have making sure the right people come to the website in the first place? And he was like, he looked at me with a blank look. It was at a cocktail party, and he was like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, well, how do you know that the right people are coming in the first place? Because if you do conversion optimization with the wrong traffic, you could actually go backwards, right? And it's bringing that out there and helping people understand that this web analytics conversion world is a dangerous place if you focus on the right or wrong things. And then the last thing I would say with that is just, with A/B testing, there might be an option C that you never tested at all, that might be very different than option A or B, that could work completely differently or better. I mean, going back to the example of that business that I helped and grew that they had never considered a diversified marketing plan, and they'd just done pay-per-click. There's potentially some of you on this webinar right now who work at a company like that, and that reality could be very different, and I encourage you to explore that. The other dogma of SEO antagonists is reporting. Yeah, reporting is not SEO. Proper action is SEO. The ultimate reporting is reflected by your business results. In other words, your profit and loss statement, the revenue, cash flow statements that your CFO puts together. It's amazing to me how many SEOs I meet who say they spend 75% of their day doing reporting instead of doing, the actual work, content, links, etc., planning, different types of things that make sense. And, it's about getting that balance right. Another antagonist of the SEO is this growing crisis in buzzwords. SEO is currently not the #1 thing on most management teams' mind because they keep hearing of the new buzzwords, the social media this, the mobile that, the big data, blah, 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 and all these new buzzwords that cause them to focus on that misinformation and focus it on there. If people were to ask me the question, what should I do with that? It's get them to remember that day many years ago where Google went down for 5 minutes. During that 5 minutes, instead of people like tweeting Facebook is down or Facebook people saying Twitter is down, the traffic across the entire web measured by several analytics companies said that it went down 40%. That shows that search for a demand capture situation, not an awareness situation, a demand capture situation is still king amongst all these channels, yet people don't understand those issues of relevancy. They don't understand those issues of things that go with that. And they don't understand that, quite frankly, search is the subliminal asset. People don't remember everything that they searched. And it's a subliminal activity when you do a search query. If I say, hey, everybody, go back to last Wednesday and write down all the queries you did on Google that day on a piece of paper, go. You're going to have trouble with that. Google has your search history and you could look it up, but that's not the point. The point is you don't remember it because it's a subconscious activity. So people forget that that's happening. I've done executive retreats with organizations and had, asked people, how has your buying habits in your personal life changed over the past 10 years? And most of them wrote down no change. Yeah, they're oblivious to the fact that they're buying stuff in e-commerce. They're oblivious to the fact that they're doing these things that are different than what they used to do. And if they're oblivious to their own personal change, it makes it hard for them to do change around the other sides of that for you and for other people, and understand how the customers are changing. If you don't understand how you changed, you don't understand how your customers changing, and that's a thing. And then speaking of change, there's this whole issue of change management and how that works in companies. Most of these people implement changes that have already been decided by other people and are trained in psychology, and they're not designed to help you define the right change. At Fearless Survival, we help you define the right change for your business model and customer model, and we help you with those strategic issues not only in culture, but in organizational design and other things, so that we can put SEO where it belongs, at the top of the marketing pyramid, helping the management team grow things. An unusual SEO antagonist that most of us haven't thought about is procurement departments. Your procurement department buys all the stuff in your company and makes your cell phone policy, and they also buy indirect services like Fearless Survival or Page One Power or other services you might buy. And these groups are managed to buy. It's a relatively new concept in corporations. It's only existed for the past decade or two in a formal way. It was an informal process before, driven by the buyer who would then work with finance to cut a check, which was actually a better process, to be quite honest. But what's happening now is people are buying based on the lowest cost provider instead of the optimal solution. So there are situations where people will buy 5-year contracts on a buzzword and get 20% off on that and not understand how that works and where that goes and where it's in there. But it's a structural problem because the way these departments are run to a cost-first mentality. Pretty much, that's a generalization, but it generally holds true, and most of them haven't been done there to be optimal solutions. So you should, on that list of people you talk to, ranging from your CFO to your legal head to your IT department, you should make friends with your procurement people and have them understand what you do and how it's different than buying a pen for your desk. Because they don't understand, and it can affect how you eventually, which partners you get to work with and which partners you don't get to work with. So it's a very important thing. Colin, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I just think it kind of speaks to the siloed, the siloization, is that a word? The siloing of, and kind of the dangers in that. Because if we have an entire different department that's doing that's bottom line driven, and it's basically checks and balances are driven by just how low a number can you report at the end of the next quarter, and oh, you did an awesome job, you reported a lower number in spend and you saved us money, great, well, you accomplished your job, rather than accomplishing what's best for the company, which might take a little bit of an investment. Maybe you buy a more expensive cell phone plan or data plan for your company, but guess what? You're going to have a higher uptime, right? And you're not missing calls, and you're not you're not losing service and things like that. So so I think that kind of integrating between departments, and even like you're saying, have a conversation. It doesn't have to be a policy that changes to get movement and to get traction here. It doesn't have to be a policy change. It can just be a habit change. Go and bring some coffee, talk to people in procurement, talk to them, ask them if they have any questions about what you do as an SEO. And I think that we can kind of get that traction going there.
Yeah, I mean, can you hear me now?
Yes.
That was a joke on your cell phone.
Oh,
you're supposed to get that.
That guy talked about the procurement. He got procured by the other company. He's working for the competitor now. So there you go.
But I just add to this, as you were talking there, you made me think about the fact that ultimately there is a problem in companies becoming more siloized, as you put it, because they're not incentivized to work together. The way the org structures are put together actually works as an opposing force to teamwork sometimes. The way the success metrics work, the way the budgets work, the way that HR might not even understand some of these concepts sometimes when they draw an org chart. I mean, it's horrifying, but it's real. And you end up with these situations where sometimes the not optimal org chart's there, or worse, somebody's been selected to manage it that doesn't have the right skill sets, which is still all too common, because it really has nothing to do with your last job title. It has to do with your competencies. How much of a naturally curious lifelong learner are you? There's people on this podcast, this webinar, that are well qualified to be more than just an SEO, or if they're a member of management, they need to understand that these people actually do have different needs and skills in terms of data, in terms of success metrics, in terms of having enough time to implement the things you're going to do. Like when you talk about link building campaigns, it doesn't happen in a week, right?
Yeah, and that's something, kind of understanding the nature of what we do, and it is really important for organizational success, because here's the thing, is that most companies, if you want to have a solid business model for 2017 and beyond, you're going to have to pay attention. Most are, but you're going to have that SEO, link building. You're going to have that kind of department. You're going to have that awareness, and that built into your business model. But a lot of times, the greater, the people outside of that department have no idea what's going on with SEO, and no idea what we do. And so I think that communication is so essential. I think that there might come a time, and maybe it's kind of starting now, where business owners, even as you're starting your business right now, startups, are maybe one of the first calls they make as they're assembling their team is to an SEO, or is to somebody that has a solid SEO background, and can make those business decisions intelligently from the get-go, instead of as like a whoops moment down the road that they didn't consider.
Right, but if they don't have their business strategy thought through before they do that, they're never going to get anywhere. If they reach out to the lowest cost provider, they're never going to get anywhere if they're going to do those things there. So as you can see, this is a topic that's never been discussed in an SEO before based on my history here. I think it's an important emerging one that people need to think about and look at, and I'm happy to talk offline with anybody who sees one of those things, but we'll move on. A lack of clarity in the business model, the customer model, the corporate culture, and the true enterprise risk can lead to failure. We've talked about that business model. What is that model? How do they find you? Is it an awareness problem? Like Fearless Survival, it's a relatively new business. I have to create awareness that it exists so that people want to do the things. People aren't, CEOs don't wake up every day and say, should I fire my consulting firm that's been here for 10 years? They should. And we'll get to that in a minute, but they aren't yet. So it's looking at that customer thing. So your culture has to be focused on the customer. And I just want to pound that for a minute because, I see so many people that like what you just said, that person, they get an idea for company or a new division or something like this, and they just, they toss something up there, but they haven't thought about the true need of the value that it creates. And, a business is about creating value for a customer. And if you forget that, you can spend a ton of money and time on things and never connect with anybody. And that's a real simple concept, but it's amazing how many businesses I see where that's not being thought about at all. Forget about a lot, just at all. It's kind of crazy, and this leads to serious risk for the enterprise if it isn't done right when that happens. So the biggest SEO antagonist is the use of large leverage consulting firms. You can think of their names. I'm not going to say them. But these are firms that have changed their model from a one-to-one consulting model where people, help you reconsider things, challenge your assumptions, move from symptoms to root causes, and figure those things out. So it's getting there, but over time they've moved from that model of one-to-one consulting, like me working with an executive team one-on-one with your executive team, to a model where they're doing large leveraged offshoring. Offshoring is not consulting. Offshoring is where people, lay off 10,000 people in your company and move it to a third-tier wage market. That leads to problems with SEO in its own right, due to language barriers, cultural barriers, other types of things that aren't good, and they can actually lead to this model of outsourcing. When somebody's billing, $500 an hour for a big data consultant that they're paying $1 an hour in some other foreign country, they're addicted to that $499 an hour spread, and they want to keep that going as long as possible. So I see evidence now in mostly Fortune 500 companies, large companies, that some of these firms have been on site permanently, perpetually. They're actually creating a conflict of interest with you, the alleged client. And I use the word alleged because if there's a conflict of interest, that's the only word you can use. And when that alleged client situation gets abused formally in like a program management office situation, where they're managing your org chart, your budgets, your situation, sometimes even controlling your decisions while they're managing the P&L of another entity, that's the very definition of a corporate governance problem. So I want boards of directors to understand that model is bad for companies, bad for the communities they live in, and because that trickles down. You lay off 10,000 people in some company and some community, your tax base, your school districts, all that go to another place due to the lack of resources. So these things have effects far beyond what goes in there, and the model that's superior there. So I have a post on I have a page on my website that talks about alternatives to those firms, and in addition to sharing the blog post that Colin's going to email out to everybody at the end of this, which will have the original blog post, it'll have this slide deck, it'll have the recording of this webinar. I also encourage you to share this specific link with your senior management, because it's not just about picking the right SEO providers, it's about picking the right business strategy providers so that you can even understand that SEO is important. Again, if we create an upswell of people who start to focus more on SEO and less on pay-per-click, Google will respond to that. But if we all keep going the way we are as lemmings being said, well, take your toys away, they're going to continue to take your toys away. The choice is up to you. and the choice is up to us as to how we do that and where we look at this. But it's really going back to for finding somebody that can actually challenge your assumptions, challenge your, take your symptoms and turn them into root causes, and then design a business process and business model that are appropriate for your company, so that when you then do your SEO, you know what you're doing, you know why you're doing it, it'll be in place, it'll make sense, and then they'll understand the value of the different channels, which will allow you to hire, a higher profile partner to do the various aspects of specialized SEO tasks that you want to do, whether it's link building with page one power or something else that's on your wish list. Once they understand the importance of it, they can put the resources aside. If they don't understand the importance of it from a business context, they can't budget it, they can't price it, because it's an emotional decision rather than a rational decision. So if they understand it and they understand why they're doing it, that pricing then makes sense to them. But if they don't understand it, it's going to be an emotional decision where they're going to look to either just check the box or do those simple things there. Would you have anything to add there, Colin?
Yeah, I think it's, it's one of the reasons why in this country, why we even considered making kind of anti-monopoly legislation or laws in the first place. There comes a point where if you get so big that you're moving not only your pieces around the chessboard and maybe your clients' pieces around, but you're moving pieces of other, maybe your other clients around to serve the interests of someone else, right? Instead of serving the interest, of your clients. And so there's a lot of interesting history there. And there's a lot of smarter people than myself that kind of weigh in on those things. But I think that it kind of speaks to that. And so the focus, and I think in this economy too, a more service-based economy that we're kind of launching into, and a more one-on-one, a one-to-one, right, model, I think is really a much more healthy model. And maybe time will tell, we can see, but I think that, yeah, exactly. I think that leaning in that direction is really the way to go. And of course, understanding the importance of SEO, and kind of how to get your business out there, besides just buying space on a billboard, right? It's more complicated than that. Marketing is a lot more complicated than that. So there's a lot of factors, and I think it's really fascinating to explore, David.
I think the only thing I'd add as you talk about that is really the end thing that creates if people use Fearless Survival. I'm all about, with that small, if you move from a situation where you have 300 people helping the process overseas to 1 or 2 people helping the right level of management, that means you need to have competent employees that can execute. And that ultimately means that people will be empowered to act, again, given the budget resources, being given those different types of things. And it reminds me of my most famous, besides Supporters or Team, another famous search marketing horror story that I had, and it involved a guy that worked at a Fortune 200 company. I won't name the company, but it was a new web company. It wasn't an old company. And the guy said, I'm coming to Chicago. I want to take you to dinner. I have a problem. You're like the only person in the world that'll even understand what I'm going to say. Let's go have dinner. And I was like, okay. And then, we have some small chat and we go through these other things. And then I said, what's the challenge? And he reaches in his briefcase and he pulls out this giant 5-year plan for his company that had been produced by one of these large leverage consulting firms. And he said, this is our 5-year plan. I have one problem with it. I'm like, what's that? It doesn't include my search marketing department. Wow. And your brain just, exploded when you thought about all the issues of that, wherever you are listening to this. And, I said, dial that down for me. What does that mean on a daily basis? It means that half of my time is spent in meetings with people I should have met 18 months ago, asking why I hadn't done something, that they expected to be done. And I hadn't met them. They had never communicated with me. They'd never given me any budget. They had never, told me about the project at all. And and he's like, as you can imagine, this gets a little old after a while. So his question was, what should he do? He eventually, he wanted to just get his resume ready and go down the street. And that's kind of when I had the epiphany to start Fearless Revival, was that story, because it made me realize that so many companies aren't integrating this stuff right in the business strategy. And if the consulting firm and the ad agency are willing to put that in place, and the CEO and management team don't know any better to ask, what's going on with that, I just said there's a problem there, and it needs to be solved. So it's part of it, and like I said, search is only one part of the problems I seek to solve. I seek to solve all silos that are undermanaged, like procurement, like events, and these other things. So with that, it's time to turn it back to Colin for the next poll question.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and send out the other poll question here in just a moment here as we launch that. Excellent. Okay, so are you interested in learning more about what Page One Power or David with Fearless Revival can do for you? So please, we'll just take a moment to kind of get let the answers kind of roll in. And appreciate everybody sticking with us today and joining us for this conversation. I've had a really great time with it, and I've learned a lot. And the Porters of Racine story, that kind of echoes with me. I think that's something that's really I think that's really kind of important for us to kind of learn from and learn about. So all right, going to go ahead and close the poll there. Thank you everybody for voting or for voting for responding. So excellent. So that's the second poll question. So we are set. And David, you want to move us on to the next slide there? Do we have any parting thoughts? Any parting thoughts? Last bits of wisdom before we sign off today?
I think it just comes back to these main things that search done wrong is a business killer. It's the most important strategic thing you can do in a business where there's an established demand capture curve on search. And if you're in a business that has that business model, you need to have your search house in order. I mean, I think it's really simple. But as we've seen by all the antagonists in SEO, there's a lot of things that can get in your way, and that list is long and growing. If we miss things on that list, I encourage people to reach out to Colin with suggestions as we might build this out into something larger in the future.
Excellent. All right, and let's go ahead. And so we don't have any questions at this time. I think people were just more kind of enraptured with the conversation and enjoyed that as well. But please feel free to contact me or David anytime down the road. We'd love to hear from you, and we will definitely give your questions the answers that you seek. And if you want to move the slide over a couple, David, for us. And one more. There we go. Excellent. Yeah. And yeah, photo credits, Unsplash, and whatnot. So thank you, everybody there. And yeah, thanks everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Reach out to us at info@pageonepower.com, our phone number there. Check us out on Twitter at @pageonepower. I'm Colin Eggleston, and I have been joined by David Dalka with Fearless Revival. David, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate having you on.
Thank you, Colin. It was my pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
Excellent. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. That has been another excellent webinar here from Page One Power.